boyfriend believed it was hilariously entertaining to keep burping and passing gas right in my face, and after I finally broke down and walked away from him, he showed up at my place, assaulted my friend, and let his true personality emerge for everyone to see. Greetings, Reddit. I'd been in a relationship with James for just over a year. We've typically had a fantastic connection, and we're pretty open about discussing any issues we encounter. I am deeply in love with him, and I can say that for the most part, we were genuinely happy. Over time, I think he grew extremely comfortable around me, which might normally be seen as a positive sign of intimacy, but it has also become a massive source of frustration for me. I'm questioning whether I'm overreacting or if this is truly as bothersome as I feel it to be. My only real grievance with him is that he's perpetually burping and farting, and it has begun to thoroughly disgust me. I feel silly even writing that down, but the extent of it has gone far beyond normal. We have both finished school and now have full-time jobs. We don't share a home, but he's been gradually transitioning into my apartment. This behavior kicked off about 5 months into our relationship, and it has escalated significantly ever since. He repeatedly belches and intentionally blows it into my face until I nearly gag, apparently because he finds it amusing. He also delights in aiming his farts at me whenever he can, laughing uproariously every time. I understand that the human body can't always help it. I grew up with 4 brothers, so I do know that bodily functions happen. But he specifically forces them to occur, which is a whole different scenario. It's not an every now and then occurrence. We've spent most nights together for the past 6 months, and he does it all evening long, literally all night. I've politely begged him to stop doing it because it genuinely grosses me out, particularly the burping, since he'll put his mouth right by my face, and the smell makes my stomach flip. He'll say sorry, but it never ceases, or he'll act like he's coming in for a kiss only to let out a huge burp in my face, then collapse into laughter until his eyes tear up when I recoil in disgust. I used to think maybe he just had digestive issues and was stuck being gassy, so I tried not to be harsh, since burping and farting are normal bodily processes. But that notion disappeared when I noticed he can suddenly control these urges with friends or at restaurants. In fact, a few months ago, we went to a wedding with members of his family. He accidentally let out one of his usual loud burps, and the table around us became silent, glaring at him like they couldn't believe it. I didn't want him to feel mortified, so on impulse, and maybe because I was slightly drunk, I high-fived him and said, "Nice one," which made the entire table burst into laughter and applause. Afterward, he pulled me aside to express gratitude for easing the tension, admitting he was really embarrassed but felt I bailed him out. However, when the night wore on, I was a little irritated and asked him why he reserves his good manners for the public, but burps in my face endlessly behind closed doors. He insisted that since I'm his girlfriend, he should be allowed to joke with me in that way, and that I was just being the stereotypical nitpicking female, uptight and high maintenance. That comment annoyed me, so I told him I was none of those things and that he absolutely knew that, and we should talk about it when we were both sober and simply enjoy the wedding for now. We did manage to have fun for the rest of the party, but the underlying problem never went away. I started planning more activities for us outside the apartment because it genuinely started to wear me down, to the point where I found it stressful to be around him alone at my place. It sounds comical, but it was making me genuinely anxious. My friends just laughed when I tried to mention it, so I felt I had nobody who took me seriously. Despite this one glaring problem, James can be incredibly sweet. I truly enjoy spending time with him in every other aspect, but I find myself feeling queasy whenever he's close, bracing for the next burp or fart. Now that he's working longer shifts, he wants to stay home and unwind most evenings, which sounds reasonable but means I'm subjected to more of these gross jokes. It became even worse when he decided it was entertaining to do it in the middle of sex, causing our sexual intimacy to take a major nosedive. A few nights ago, he was messaging me from work about how rough his day had been, and because I wanted to take care of him, I volunteered to head over to his place and cook his favorite meal, hoping to cheer him up. Once he clocked out and got home, we enjoyed dinner. Afterward, he tried to kiss me, and I instinctively moved my head to the side, anticipating another repulsive belch. This led to a fight where he accused me of infidelity, presumably because I'd been avoiding having sex with him. I calmly explained that it was the endless burping that turned me off, and he responded that I needed to get over it, since he was only playing around and I was being a prude, implying that as his girlfriend, I should never reject his affectionate gestures. Hearing him say that, I told him this was an ongoing concern, not something new. None of it was funny to me, and in fact, I'd actually thrown up over it, so he should understand how serious it was. While I was explaining this, he started chuckling, and I completely lost my composure. I'm not the yelling type, I'm usually calm, so the way I exploded genuinely shocked him. I called his behavior repulsive, telling him that I was getting so fed up I hardly felt attracted to him anymore. I emphasized that I'd tried really hard to be tolerant, but consideration is a two-way street. At that point, it was no longer just about whether something was gross or amusing, it was about respecting boundaries. He got defensive, claiming I was overreacting and being silly, but I cut him off. Eventually, he seemed remorseful when he realized how important this was to me, promising he would quit altogether. I reassured him that naturally burping once in a while isn't a big deal, it's his deliberate efforts to force it that drove me crazy. After that heart-to-heart, the next couple of hours felt blissful, there were no forced burps or farts. I was overjoyed, relieved to cuddle without gagging. Feeling optimistic, I started unzipping his pants, wanting to give him a little pleasure to help him unwind from his stressful day. As awkward as this is, I'll just say it plainly, while I was going down on him, he pushed my head so I couldn't pull away, tensed up, and intentionally let out a series of loud farts while giggling. My frustration and humiliation hit the ceiling, and I burst into tears on the spot. I think the gravity of what he'd done sunk in for him then. He released me and tried to comfort me, babbling excuses about how he believed I only hated the burping, so he thought a series of farts could lighten the mood. That was too much. I hastily left his place. It's been 2 days since that incident. He's blown up my phone with calls and texts, apologizing in one message and then sounding furious in the next. I have no idea how to respond. I'm at a crossroads, feeling that this relationship is most likely doomed, yet I also still harbor love for him. I feel violated, nauseated, and confused. A few of our mutual acquaintances have reached out, worried about what's going on, but I'm reluctant to explain everything. I tried telling my best friend, who found it hilarious, which only made me clam up further. I'm stuck feeling ridiculous, like maybe I'm overreacting or being too uptight. On top of that, he still has a bunch of personal belongings at my apartment, and I'm dreading the day he decides to pick them up because I'm not prepared to face him alone. Am I being melodramatic? Is there some sort of middle ground I'm missing? In the comments, where I replied, someone wrote, I grew up with 3 brothers, and I wouldn't accept this from a boyfriend either. Tell him, when you do this, you remind me of growing up around my siblings, and you're starting to feel about as alluring as a brother. That means I'm not attracted to you because of this behavior. Stop it immediately or I'm going to walk away from this relationship right now. You're trampling my boundaries, and it isn't acceptable. If he can't process that you're dead serious after such a conversation, then you should definitely break up with him because he has the maturity level of a toddler. I responded something like, that's exactly how I feel, he's starting to feel like one of my brothers. I've tried communicating this, but I suspect he never took me seriously. Thank you for your perspective, I guess you're right that it's fundamentally about personal boundaries, which is why I've become so distressed. I ended up doubting myself and convincing myself I was just over the top. But apparently, I do have some valid reasons for my emotions. Another user named Bloopy Tile commented, Dear God. Just, Dear God. After you literally yelled at him about this hours before, he thought it'd be hysterical to do it again. Can you even envision getting intimate with him now without dry heaving? Honestly, the entire thing is comical in that I can't believe an adult genuinely behaved like this type of way. I feel you must be making this up. I replied, to be fair, he messaged me that he misunderstood, thinking only the burping part really bugged me, so he thought farting would be comedic relief. It's so ridiculous I haven't even bothered texting him back. Update, thank you to everyone who responded to my original post or took the time to send private messages. I truly wasn't anticipating the level of understanding and encouragement I received, but I'm relieved to learn I'm not completely by myself in feeling the way I do. Last night was horrible, I was lost in all sorts of conflicted, sickening emotions, but reading everyone's insights offered me a sense of clarity. I want to clarify a few points before explaining how everything reached its peak for me. When I first began dating James, he didn't launch into this never-ending bodily function routine right away. I still remember the initial time he did it deliberately. I was bewildered and immediately stated how uncomfortable it made me. He seemed to agree not to do it again. I never once played along or giggled when he purposely did it. There's a stark difference between an accidental slip and what he intentionally does. Many of your replies pushed me to step back and examine the rest of our relationship. Indeed, we had other conflicts that echoed this same pattern. He used to drive recklessly just for kicks. I told him it terrified me, and he kept dismissing me as too tense and overreacting until he almost got into a crash, at which point he reined it in. He also had a habit of playfully pinching me and tickling me really hard, which was painful and even left bruises. Whenever I pointed out that it hurt, he would say I was exaggerating. Eventually, after I showed him the bruises, he did stop for good. Because he respected that limit, I never thought to label him as abusive, although I realize now there was a concerning cycle. I noticed quite a few people advocated for retaliation, telling me to do the same to him. While it might be tempting in some fantasy scenario, it honestly isn't who I am. I will never let someone else's actions determine my own. I stand by my belief that my personal moral compass refuses to let me deliberately hurt another person. Reading the support from strangers, people who don't owe me a thing, moved me to tears because I'd been feeling completely isolated and self-conscious, believing I was overreacting to something that many others find comedic. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for letting me know I'm not alone. Anyway, onto what happened today. I didn't reply to any of James's calls or texts. I blocked him across the board. I feel like I pretty much made it clear it was over, and he seemed to be aware of that. I also texted a handful of our shared friends and politely asked them to drop the subject, letting them know I'm okay but that I'm done with him. I didn't delve into the gory details. One friend was dismissive, saying, over a one-time silly accident. Seriously? Whatever makes you happy, so I suspect James might have misled them. It's done that he may have lied, but I'm aiming to keep supportive folks in my circle. Meanwhile, I invited my best friend to my place and asked him to help me box up James's stuff. My friend agreed immediately. He kept asking if I was all right, so I opened up the entire situation by showing him my original post. He was horrified. He apologized for finding it funny at first, saying he just hadn't understood how severe it was. He offered to deliver James's belongings himself and promised not to start a fight. We spent most of the afternoon packing James's things in my apartment when, all of a sudden, the front door swung open. Hearing the door, we stopped talking. It was James. I froze, fear coursing through me because James had never barged in unannounced like that, not to my workplace or my apartment. My friend demanded, "What the hell are you doing here?" But James only focused on me, ignoring my friend, and said, "I thought you were dead or something. Why the hell have you been ignoring me?" My friend stepped between us, passed him one of the boxes, and told him to leave, insisting that we were through and I didn't need to see him. James chuckled, tried to approach me directly, and told my friend to butt out because he needed to speak to me alone. My friend held his ground, warning James that he was trespassing and could face legal problems if he didn't leave immediately. That's when James's expression turned distorted with anger, as though he was someone I'd never met before. He started screaming, calling me all sorts of vile names like dirty trollop and worthless harlot, saying I was some stuck-up princess, and it just went on and on. My friend, standing firm, responded with something like, "Okay, that's nice, but you're leaving now, or I'll make you." Suddenly, James threw his box down and punched my friend square in the face, causing him to stagger backward. James lunged toward me and seized me by the arms, violently shaking me while shouting that I was a fool to throw our relationship away and that I was probably sleeping with my friend. I was petrified and couldn't believe this nightmare was real. My friend regained his footing and, in a flash, grabbed James by the back of his shirt, yanking him away from me and hurling him out of my apartment. James took off down the hallway, raging, kicking at other people's doors, still screaming. Another neighbor came out, alarmed, and I begged him to call for an ambulance because my friend's nose was bleeding. I felt a wave of embarrassment swamp me, tears streaming as I apologized repeatedly. At the hospital, they confirmed my friend's nose was fractured. He's been making silly jokes about looking like Owen Wilson, trying to keep my spirits up, which I appreciate, but I still feel terrible. He's physically okay, but I'm overwhelmed by guilt. If I had trusted my instincts earlier, if I hadn't chosen to stand there paralyzed in fear, maybe his nose would be intact. My friend wants us to go to the police and file a statement, and I know I have to do it for my own safety, but I'm so scared and want this ordeal to vanish. This was my first serious relationship, and I'm reeling at the realization that the person I thought I knew could morph into this violent stranger. I keep wondering if I missed red flags. My thoughts are so jumbled that I feel as though I'm shaking from the inside out. I'm crashing at my friend's place for now because I can't bring myself to stay alone in my apartment. I feel so much shame even typing this all out, because it grew out of something that on the surface seems so trivial, silly burping and farting, and yet it escalated into a terrifying situation. I have no clue how to proceed, but my friend is taking me to make an official police report. Has anyone out there faced something similar? How do you come to terms with the fact that your partner can hide such pent-up fury for over a year? I just don't understand how or why. I'm sorry for bombarding everyone with questions. My brain is a chaotic mess. Next story, living a second life with my ex in my lucid dreams for a year. After I confessed to my wife, she contacted my ex to expose me, but my ex told her she thinks my dreams are actually pretty sweet. I'm a 31-year-old man married to a 28-year-old woman. We've been together for 3 years, got engaged rather quickly, and have led a fairly standard existence as a couple, nothing extraordinary. We handle normal couple things like filing joint taxes, doing house chores, curling up to watch movies. Neither of us, to my knowledge, has engaged in physical cheating. However, I possess the ability to lucid dream, to some degree, which means I can consciously manipulate events within my dreams, something that typically feels like a cool ability because it allows me to create fun adventures while asleep and gives me an instant escape hatch if a dream ever gets frightening. But here's where things get complicated. Over the past year, I've been consistently dreaming about my ex-girlfriend, my first great love, who is 29 now. The truth is, I never fully got over her. We dated for 5 years, from when I was 15 until 17, and then from 20 to 22, long story about the timeline, but altogether it was roughly 5 years. When I graduated college, I had to move from New York to South Carolina to chase a career opportunity. My ex didn't want to leave her life in New York, so we ended things, and I was devastated. Over time, I moved on, and while we had minimal contact via social media, we never wandered into inappropriate territory, no sneaky texts or anything. I'll admit, I kept some tabs on her profiles from afar, but never in an obsessive way. Then, about a year ago, she announced on social media that she was getting married. This triggered a tidal wave of old emotions in me, but again, I never acted on them outwardly. Strangely enough, that very same evening, I experienced my first dream about her in years. The dream didn't start as lucid, it was just a vivid scenario of her knocking on my door to invite me out for coffee. Then it ended. I woke up feeling like something real had just happened. The effect lingered. In the following weeks, I found myself dreaming of her multiple times, and eventually I used my lucid dreaming skill to mold the dreams more deliberately. We ended up reliving the highlights of our relationship, going on casual dates, traveling back to Paris, a place we'd visited during college, rewalking the same routes we once explored in real life. It was oddly comforting, like I was experiencing an alternate timeline where we never broke up. As these dreams grew more frequent, I actually started anticipating bedtime because I would get to see her. My wife began noticing I was somewhat distant, but I brushed it off until I couldn't anymore. She approached me recently, saying she felt me pulling away. Feeling guilty, I confessed everything, the constant dreams, the fact that they became lucid, the emotional weight they carried. She initially believed I was joking, but when it sunk in that I was serious, she blew up, calling me an adulterer in spirit and telling her family, who labeled me a cheating weirdo. She threatened to reach out to my ex and let her know what a scumbag I was. I was stunned by the intensity of her reaction, but in hindsight, I understand that from her perspective, I was concealing a one-sided emotional affair. I tried explaining I never physically cheated or tried to get in contact with my ex. I truly adore my wife, yet I still feel something for the old flame. Maybe I should have been upfront with her before we got married, but I never foresaw my mind conjuring these elaborate dreams. My wife was so furious that she packed a bag and left for a hotel. Her mother and sisters all told me off, calling me names. It was awful. In the comment section, someone named Soul Angelic wrote, "Yeah, no, I think your marriage is probably done. I, too, would consider this a form of cheating, and divorcing you would be warranted. It's obvious you're not truly in love with your wife the way you claim." I replied by saying, "I do love my wife, that's the reason I proposed to her. But I still harbor remnants of love for my ex, and I acknowledge now I ought to have dealt with that baggage before committing to someone else. I never intended for this to escalate." Experiencing these dream scenarios was like stepping into a lost fantasy of how my life might have been if we'd stayed together. But my wife has left and turned off her phone's location. I'm worried sick about where she might be. I hope she's safe. I genuinely don't want our relationship to crumble. Another commenter, Kilda L. Zobot, asked, "I'm genuinely curious, what on earth did you think your wife would do when you came clean about dreaming of your ex? Did you really think she'd be chill about it?" I responded with, "No, I knew she'd be hurt, but I felt I owed her honesty. I didn't want to gaslight her intuition that something was off. I just never expected her to leave without telling me where she was going. Her family has cut all contact, too. I do want to fix this, but I'm unsure how." Update from 2 days later, I previously shared how my wife vanished after my confession, and she was gone for over a day. In the early morning hours, around 3 a.m., she came home. She told me, quite bluntly, she wants a divorce. She said she refuses to compete with a dream version of my former girlfriend, and she deserves far better than some loser who obsesses over a fantasy every night. Yet, she also doesn't want to move out or dive straight into divorce proceedings because money is tight and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We both have stable incomes. I pull in about $90,000 post-tax and she makes $85,000, but she doesn't want to disrupt our financial stability immediately. I apologized profusely for hurting her, for making her feel like she wasn't enough, and I emphasized that I had never engaged in any physical affair or illicit conversation with my ex. Still, she's firm in her decision. She doesn't want me as a husband anymore. I admit I've done irreparable damage, even though in my mind it felt non-physical and not truly cheating. I see now it was an emotional betrayal. She said we can cohabitate for up to 2 years, or until the pandemic ends, but she forced me out of our bedroom and essentially took ownership of the entire second floor of the house for herself. The tension in the house was unbearable, so at sunrise, I left to work remotely at a coffee shop. While I was there, I was stunned to receive a direct message on IG from my ex. Apparently, my wife had followed through with her threat to contact my ex personally. My ex said she received a rambling message from my wife detailing how I'd been dreaming of her every night. My ex wanted to hear my side, so I told her everything. I braced myself for anger or criticism, but to my surprise, she thought it was endearing that I still held affection for her, especially since I'd never tried to rope her into an affair or do anything to sabotage her life. I'm not suggesting that her approval justifies the pain I caused my wife, it doesn't undo the damage, but her compassion offered a strange sense of relief. We ended up conversing for a couple of hours about how our younger selves parted ways, revisiting old memories. She informed me that her engagement had ended months earlier. I told her about how my wife was divorcing me now, and she seemed sympathetic. We concluded on a polite note, but ever since, I've been wondering if fate is stepping in to give us a second shot. I'm bracing for judgment, but from my perspective, my marriage has already crumbled. Knowing that the person who indirectly contributed to my marriage's downfall, through no fault of her own, doesn't see me as an utter creep means the world to me. I'm not sure what the future holds. Perhaps my ex and I can rekindle a friendship, although I can imagine my soon-to-be ex-wife will despise the idea if she finds out. But since we're headed for a divorce, there isn't much she can do. I do hope both of us eventually heal, move forward, and carve out fulfilling futures. My wife deserves genuine happiness, and I suppose I need to figure out where I go from here, whether it's as a friend, or more, to my old flame, or simply forging a new path. I realize I hurt my wife and that the cracks in our relationship likely can't be repaired. All I can do is keep moving forward.